Deacon Matthew Newsome serves in the Diocese of Charlotte, where he has been the campus minister at Western Carolina University since 2008. He also serves in the Office of Catechetical Formation and is the author of the book The Devout Life, a modern guide to practical holiness with St. Francis de Sales. You can contact Deacon Matthew at his personal website, www.matthewnewsome.com, or you can read his blog and homily archive at teachingandpreaching.substack.com. And you can get his book, The Devout Life, at Sophia Institute Press. Deacon Matt, I just want to say thank you so much for being here with us and welcome to the Joy of Transformation.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Cathy. It is a joy to be here.
Awesome. Yeah. It's the original title was The Unplanned Joyful Life. And because the material has transitioned, I still wanted that word joy in there. And I think that as Catholics, that's really what we're able to obtain, through the good times and the bad times. So I'm glad that you recognize that.
We strive
Um,
for that anyway.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So anyway, I just want to welcome you to the show and then also ask you just right off the bat if you would like to share with us your own personal faith journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I am a convert to the Catholic faith. We just celebrated the Easter Vigil. I don't know when this is going to go live on the air, but as we're recording this, we're in the middle of Easter week, and so we just celebrated the Easter Vigil. And I had one of my students, as you mentioned, I'm a campus minister at Western. One of my students was baptized and confirmed, received his first Eucharist. And it brought back a lot of memories because I was received those sacraments of initiation myself. I was baptized at the age of 23,
Wow.
and my initial instruction in the Catholic faith actually took place through campus ministry at the same school where I minister now. So Easter is a very special time of the year for me. So this will mark my 26th year as a Catholic. So your listeners
Wow.
who are good at math can figure out how old I am
Yeah.
now based off of that. But
Yeah.
yeah, I was raised without any faith tradition whatsoever. My parents were both raised in Christian households. My mother comes from a Methodist family. My dad, largely Episcopalian, but he had some Pentecostal relatives as well, and so kind of bounced back and forth between those churches. By the time they met, though, and married, neither one of them was practicing a faith. They would have considered themselves agnostic, if not atheist. So when me and my brothers were being raised, none of us were baptized. We never went to church. Just that wasn't a part of our life. Um, I first encountered the Catholic faith in college. My wife of 25 years, Joni, she was Catholic her whole life, and it wasn't until I met her and began attending Mass with her that I was really introduced into the practice of the Catholic faith. Now, a lot happened prior to that to kind of prime the pump,
Can
if
I
you will.
ask you to repeat that again? The what of the Catholic faith? Because something happened with the recording, and then I'll just cut this out. You said introduce you to the something of the Catholic faith.
Right. She introduced me to the practice of the
Okay.
Catholic faith, right? But there was a lot that preceded that primed the pump for me being open to Catholicism, and we can go into more detail on that if you want to. But just a lot of what I was had been reading. I was a literature major in college with a history minor, and I had a special love for the history of the Middle Ages, and so I studied medieval literature, Chaucer and Mallory, and so forth. And a lot of medieval literature is just steep in religion, steeped in the Christian faith. And so I had to kind of learn about Christianity as I was studying the works of literature that I was studying. And when I actually encountered the Catholic Church in person, even though it's, from the outside appearances, quite different, I recognized something of the heart of the church that I had up until that point just known from history books.
Mhm.
So I began attending Mass with her. She was very active in the campus ministry here at Western Carolina University, where we both went for undergrad. And I started coming to ministry events with her just because that was her friend group, and I wanted to get to know her and what she was interested in. Um, and I just had such a warm reception with the students who were here, with the campus minister who was here, the priest who was offering mass. It was very beautiful. I would describe the atmosphere as welcoming, but not demanding, right? Everybody was okay with the fact that I was not Catholic. They were happy that I was there. There was no pressure put on me to convert or believe anything that I didn't believe, and that gave me the freedom to ask questions and to explore. And as I said, being a student of history, I wanted to know the history of the Catholic Church, and I wanted to know why did we believe these things, and why does the church do this and that. And so I started reading all kinds of books on Catholicism, and somehow or other stumbled my way into books on apologetics. Um, and again, if you want to ask follow-up questions, we can go into more detail. But there was a certain point at I was doing my study, doing my reading, and I realized internally that I actually believed this.
Wow.
That everything that I was reading about how Christ founded the Catholic Church, and this is, the one true holy and apostolic church. I'm like, I believe that this is true,
Mhm.
and that kind of forced a decision point on me. It's like, well, what do I do with that? Right? If I truly believe that Jesus is and was who he said he is and was, and that he truly established the Catholic Church to be that continuation of his ministry and his presence among us in the world today, um, what do I do with that? And in my mind at the time, I remember very clearly thinking, well, either I have to deny what I know about Christ or become Catholic. And I
Mhm.
I wasn't sure that I was ready to become Catholic,
Mhm.
but I knew I wasn't ready to deny Christ.
Mhm. I
And so
love.
I said, okay, if this is what Jesus is asking me to do, then this is what I have to do. And so I told my girlfriend at the time. I remember we were driving home to see her parents. We weren't engaged yet, but we were seriously dating. We were kind of moving towards engagement. This was long term. And we were driving to see her parents. We were going down the highway at about 70 miles an hour, and I just told her, I think I want to become Catholic. And she almost drove off the road. She's like, when you tell a girl that, wait until, the vehicle has come to a safe and complete stop. But yeah,
Wow.
so I got signed up for what we called RCIA
Yep.
at the time. It's been changed to OCIA since, but signed up for RCIA. I went through my catechesis. I was received into the church at the Easter Vigil in the year 2000, the Jubilee year
Wow.
2000. And
Wow.
yeah, I
That's
never would have guessed that I'd end up here as a deacon and as a campus minister at the same school where I went through RCIA, but
wow.
here I am.
That is so amazing. And do you think that I love that you had the love of history because do you find that because you had been studying history, it almost sounds like you started not just looking at the church from a historical view, but then you started becoming convicted about the faith um through that. Like that was like one of the ways that led you to want to know more is because your love of history. And that's where a lot of people I feel that I like people that I interview that actually convert from other religions. It seems like it's the history of the faith that actually is the thing, the factor that brings them to the Catholic faith. Um, but it's neat that you had the love of history, and it seems like you would study history, factual, but like, did you feel like there was a shift where it wasn't just information you were taking in, but it was like a life that you wanted to live? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And God is sneaky in the way that he does this. So yeah, I would say that my interest in history, and I've always, as long as I can remember, had an interest in history. My interest in history, I think, gave me a grounding, in the sense that the past was real to me. Like I understood that where we are now, like we got here from somewhere else. Like it's our current culture, our current civilization, our current reality. It's building upon what came before,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's true in terms of our religion. Whether you're Catholic or Presbyterian or Lutheran or Methodist or whatever, Baptist,
Mm-hmm.
there's a history to your particular tradition, and you can roll back the clock and you can find its origin and where it came from. And if Christianity is supposed to be the religion of Jesus, well, we want to go back to Jesus, right?
Right.
I want to belong to the church that Jesus established.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a very real question for me, and one of the reasons that kept me from really exploring other avenues, because I had friends growing up that were Baptist and Presbyterian and all these different things, and I would sometimes go to church with them if I was spending the night at a friend's house and his family went to church on Sunday. I might go with them.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, it was always difficult to see what's the connection between this Southern Baptist church or this Presbyterian church. And I'm not singling out any denomination here,
Mm-hmm. No.
but what's the connection between them and Christ, between them and the apostles?
Mm-hmm.
There was a disconnect that I didn't find that in the Catholic Church. In the Catholic Church, all of a sudden, oh, there is this long, long, deep history and
Mm-hmm.
tradition. Um, but when I mentioned God being sneaky, I had this intellectual curiosity for the history of things. I like to know, where did things come from? Where did this start? What's the meaning behind this and that symbol? And one of the things I was very curious about as I was investigating Catholicism was the Rosary, because I had never seen anything like that before. That to me was uniquely Catholic, and it was cool, right? Like you have this object, it's like, oh, Catholics have accessories, that you can get.
Yeah.
And so where did this idea of praying with this string of beads, I don't know, it was just alluring to me, and I wanted to know, where did this come from? And I remember I went on Amazon and I was looking at books about the history of the rosary. And keep in mind, I'm curious about the history of this object, this accessory, this, whatever. And so I looked for books on the history of the rosary. And I remember I ordered one that was called, I'm going to try and get the name of this book right, The Rosary. And the subtitle was The Mystery and the Telling of the Beads. I
Mm.
think but it's by Kevin Orland Johnson. And I said, and in the description, it made it sound like this is a history of the rosary. I'm like, okay, great. So I get the book in the mail. And Cathy, I opened up the box from Amazon, and right away it smelled like roses.
Oh my
I don't know if
goodness.
this is something that like the publisher did, or the seller, or if this was a minor miracle that God performed, but the book
Right.
smelled like roses, like they had put rose oil, in the binding or something.
Wow.
I'm like, that's beautiful. But what this book actually did was it talked a little bit about the history of praying the rosary, but then it talked about the prayers. And what's the first thing you pray when you pray the rosary? Well, you make the sign of the cross in the
Hmm.
name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. So there's a whole chapter about, well, why is the sign of the cross important? What do we believe about the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit? The next thing you pray is the Apostles' Creed. And the creed summarizes the whole faith. And
Hmm.
so the next chapter in the book was all about the Apostles' Creed, and then you pray
Wow.
the Lord's Prayer, which is the model prayer that Jesus gives us to teach us how to pray. And so I'm getting a little catechesis in prayer, from this book.
Hmm.
And it goes through the whole rosary like that. And there are chapters dealing with every mystery of the rosary. And the mysteries of the rosary are what? They're meditations on different life of Christ. And so I was getting the whole life of Christ.
Yeah.
So here I thought I was reading a book about the history of a string of beads.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
I ended up getting what was my first real in-depth catechism on the Christian faith.
Wow.
And that's not what converted me. I don't think I finished the book and said, well, I got to be Catholic now.
Right.
But I
Yeah.
think that certainly changed the way that I was approaching Catholicism from being an object of intellectual curiosity
Mm.
to something that could actually be incorporated into my life
Yeah.
and should actually be incorporated into my life if I were going to enter into this in any kind of authentic, meaningful way.
Yeah. And I love that you shared that because I pray the rosary and I never thought about the fact that basically it does address every aspect of our faith in one way or another, you know?
Really does. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And the fact that whether they scented that book with roses or not, or rose oil, um, you got like a very real tangible experience, like right from the get-go with that, you know?
I did.
I
I
love
did.
that. Yeah, I
Mm.
love that story. And another thing that I was thinking of when we were talking about you and your background of history, have you ever seen the movie A Case for Christ by Lee Strobel?
I'm aware of the movie. I have not
Okay.
seen it.
He also wrote a book, but
Mhm.
basically, him and his wife are non-Catholic, but they were atheist, and then she was converting, and he had a really hard time with it, but he was a reporter, and this is a true story, and so he went out on a quest to prove her wrong, and he ended up proving Christ right. So it's a really great movie if you ever have a chance to see it, and I could see even like students, enjoying that, but. Your story kind of reminds me of that, but not in such a harsh, he had more of a harsh fight against it. But it was his, and then he even traveled and talked to, scientists and historians and things like that because he had the access to do that. So yeah, I love that. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you is how do you feel that your conversion to the faith and practicing the faith, how do you feel that if you feel that your life has been transformed, how would you say that your life has been transformed because of your faith?
Oh, gosh, the trajectory of my life is just totally changed. I mean, everything changed from that moment. I mentioned that my wife is a cradle Catholic, so she's been Catholic her whole life, and the faith has always been important, to her. Um, I don't know how much detail I want to go into, but up until I met her, I was at a point, I was in my senior year in college. I desperately wanted to like marry, start a family, had not had a lot of successful relationships prior to that. And when God brought her into my life, it was really the stability that I needed. So my whole family life now, my wife and I have seven children. My oldest two are both getting married this year, and so we're excited about the prospect of future grandkids,
Aw.
hopefully in the not too distant future. And just I don't know, my life is so full, and I just know that it wouldn't have been that way, otherwise. But even just in me personally, I'm a very different person. It never dawned on me that I might be doing ministry in the church professionally. It was not even on my radar growing up.
Hmm. Hmm.
I wanted to be an astronomer. I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to be a librarian. I wanted to be all these different things. And, those doors were just closed, and that's not what God had in mind. And, when I was discerning the diaconate, which we can talk about that if you want to. But one of the signs for me that this was a vocation God was inviting me to rather than, something that I was pursuing on my own, was the fact that this was just never anything that I wanted for myself.
Hmm.
But it's where God led me, and I couldn't be happier
Wow.
doing what I'm doing. So yeah, it's almost difficult to answer that question
Yeah. Well, it's
because so much
interesting.
has changed.
Yeah, it's interesting because I can relate to a lot of what you're saying. And I ended up working the majority of my career in maternal child. But after the birth of my first child, I had a serious postpartum depression and actually had to be hospitalized for 3 weeks. So it was a very traumatic time. And I struggled with it, but that's when I found the faith and I saw it in my husband's family. So there's a connection with that. But when I went to school for nursing, because of what I experienced in that depression, I wanted to do for others what those nurses did for me. So I became a nurse just to want to help other people. And the last place I wanted to work was maternal child because it was very vulnerable for me and it brought back memories that I didn't have, some memories that I wanted to have, you know? And so again, like you said, God is sneaky because I worked on all the other floors. And after I became a nurse, I worked at a pediatrician's office and was like, wow, this is like so refreshing to work with like young children. So then I bid on a job in maternal child. And then I ended up working in pretty much all four areas and became a lactation consultant and did home care. Like I did everything that I could have done in that department. And so, like you, it's the last place. But I think because of my experience, it made me more sensitive and aware. And I think the same with you. You wouldn't have expected to be where you are, but isn't God like He just knows us so much better than we even know ourselves? Because
Absolutely.
you're in
Yeah.
a position to minister to people that were in the exact same place that you were. That's just
hmm
incredible.
Yeah, and another similarity is that that motivation of gratitude, like you wanted to give back, go into nursing to give back because of all the care that you received. I remember when I went through RCIA, I was just filled with such gratitude for all that the church had given to me. I felt compelled to share it with others.
Wow.
I remember I talked to our RCIA instructor, immediately after I was baptized and all this. And I said, if you need someone to sponsor anybody next year, sign me up because I want to keep doing this. And so the following year, I went through RCIA again, this time as someone's sponsor. By year three, I think they were asking me to help teach, to co-teach RCIA because this whole time, Cathy, I'm studying and I'm continuing to read and learn more and learn
Wow.
more. Um, so I served in RCIA ministry as a catechist for a number of years before I eventually went into campus ministry. And I remember distinctly having the thought uh, early on in my faith journey that if God had would ever give me the opportunity to work for the church, I would take it.
Wow.
Just out of a motivation to give back. And
Yeah.
I didn't know what that would look like
Yeah.
because I mean I live in Western North Carolina. The church is pretty small out here. There are not a lot of professional opportunities to work for the church and even fewer that you can support a family on.
Yeah.
So I really had no idea what that would even look like, but I remember having that drive that if God would ever give me the opportunity, my instinct would be to say yes, just to
Yeah.
be able to give back. And so when the call did come and I did have that opportunity, it was, I prayed about it and talked to my wife about it. But my instinct was to say, okay, Lord, if you're calling me to do this, I'll go where you're leading. So
Wow, I love that. And I think it's also really amazing and where the church is at right now with so many opportunities for evangelizing and sharing the faith with other people. And I think that when, you're what you spoke of your wife as this stability, this because she was grounded in the faith, and that's similar to my husband. Um, but when you have not had the faith or experienced it in that way, and then you convert to it, you're almost like wowed by it, where when you've been brought up with it, yes, you have it in you, it's a beautiful part of your life, but you've never experienced what it was like not to have it. So I think that so many of the people that are doing a lot of the evangelizing and sharing like you are people that may have come from other faiths and converted, or didn't practice a faith at all. And I just think it's so awesome how God just uses it all, and I'm so thankful for people that did go without, because I do think that there's a platform now for people. And there's people out there that don't practice or are Catholic, but are not practicing Catholics or don't even know what Catholicism is. And when they hear somebody say, I went to school for history, I didn't grow up with anything, like, because sometimes I think the Catholic faith can be a little overwhelming for people. They look at it like there's so much to learn. And like you said, from the outside, it's different than being on the inside. And if people take that chance just to step into the church and just attend one mass, sit in the back if you want, just take it all in. It's so different than what people think it is, on the outside.
Yeah, it is. It
Yeah,
is. Yeah, it's a good point you make about experiencing life without faith. Because you know, Kathy, it's not like, oh, I'm Catholic now. Everything's perfect. Everything is fine.
right,
We talk about that joy at the
right,
opening of the episode, right? And the joy that we have in Christ, it's not a joy that comes from the fact that everything's fine, that we
right.
never have suffering or never have hardships. There are hard days and there are
Oh,
things
yeah.
in the faith that we struggle with. But in those moments when I struggle, I can look back and remember who I was before I was baptized, what
Mm-hmm.
my life was like then, and compare that and go, oh, like even with the struggles that I'm having now, like I am so grateful that I have my faith. I am so
Yes.
grateful that God has revealed himself to me. And because I don't know how I would manage through those struggles if I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have my faith to help me to make sense of it all, to cope with it all. I don't even want to say make sense because
Right,
sometimes we just can't. We can't. It's not about
right,
making sense of your suffering, but
right.
finding a purpose and a meaning in it, and
Yeah,
being able to trust in a God to sustain us and to give a quality to our suffering.
right.
I can't imagine living life without it. Only I
Yeah.
can because I did
Yeah.
before.
And I think for me, the only difference with us is that I did grow up Catholic, but my family just really didn't practice it
Yeah.
together. So it wasn't like reinforced in the home or things like that. But there is definitely a difference. And I agree 100%. There's been different things that my family has dealt with that have been, tragedies. And during that time, it was like I could feel God speaking, giving me clarity over things that I couldn't really fully understand, but it was like He was giving me these uh, confirmations and signs that were just so clear that I knew that this was part of a bigger plan, that this was not something that I had to figure it all out. And that it gave me peace and comfort knowing that there is a God who, even during this difficult time, He's still loving me through it. He's still giving me, these people to surround me, or these scriptures to read, or this vision in my room that all of a sudden I'm noticing that I never noticed before. So there are so many things. And I just think I love your story, and I'm so happy that we got to talk, that we are still talking. I'm not ending this, but I'm just very excited to have you on this podcast, because I just think that everything that you're sharing is so important to both practicing Catholics and non-Catholics, to hear and just to be reminded of, because sometimes we practice faith and it becomes such a part of our lives that it's easy for us to take it for granted. So I think these stories are not only good for people that are non-Catholic, but they're good for people that are Catholic, to replenish and kind of restore our faith. Could you tell us a little bit about the work that you do with the students at Western Carolina University, and how do you serve them?
Absolutely. So we are so Western Carolina University, for those who don't know, we're up in the mountains near the Great Smoky Mountain National Park in the western part of the state. It's a state school. It's a mid-sized state school. There's a little bit more than 10,000 students in residence, which in a tiny little town, I don't know, probably doubles or triples the the population when school's in session. But it is a state school. But our diocese has a presence here. We own a little house that is literally across the street from campus. And so it's within walking distance of all the dorms and everything. And the it's a two-story home. The first floor, we've converted that into a chapel. And we work in conjunction with our local parish that's about a 10 or 15-minute drive away. Our pastor is able to come out and offer mass for the students on Sunday afternoons and hear confessions, minister to them. But then the upstairs of the building is our meeting space. It's our student lounge. It's where my office is. So I'm talking to you from there today.
Hmm.
And we offer just a wide variety of services for the students throughout the week. So this is my full-time job. I don't have a campus ministry staff. It's just me. I rely on a student leadership team, some of our upperclassmen to help me run programs and things. But we offer large events, small events, and then various different one-on-one opportunities. So large events would we do weekly fellowship meals and some kind of educational or faith building program after that. I do adoration every week after our dinners for the students to have that time of prayer, do a holy hour with them. We do retreats every semester. We organize community service events, those kinds of things. Small groups. We have a number of student-led Bible study groups that meet on campus. We will sometimes have men's groups, women's groups, different special interest groups. Right now, we've got a Catholic writers group, right? Because we've got a few
Wow.
students that are interested in exploring their faith that way. So these are all student-led groups, and I work with this to help them plan
Wow.
and organize that. And then one-on-one, I'm here to meet with students for their individual needs. If they need spiritual counseling, sometimes they just need a trusted adult to talk to about something
Hmm.
going on in their life. But I also offer spiritual direction, catechesis, faith formation. We do an OCIA program here through the university, and I'm able to meet with the students either in groups or individually, depending on, what their schedule allows. I'm just here for the students.
Hmm.
We are the presence of the Catholic Church on this campus for the students.
Okay.
Our Catholic population is a pretty small minority. But we don't just serve the Catholic students.
Right.
We extend everything that the Catholic Church has to offer to any student who is interested in it. And so every semester we have a good number of non-Catholic students who participate.
Hmm.
Sometimes they end up becoming interested in joining the Catholic Church, and we
Hmm.
welcome that. But sometimes not. Sometimes they're just exploring the Catholic faith, or they're coming because their friends, come here, or they're getting spiritually fed. One year I had uh, I think he was Lutheran. He was non-Catholic is the point. He was not Catholic. He came from a different faith tradition, but he would come to Mass every Sunday, and he would come to our gatherings, and he would come to our Bible studies and all of this. And I thought, this guy's going to convert any minute now. Like he's one of my more faithful students. He's always here.
Hmm.
And a year went by, and I asked him. I said, I'm normally not this direct with people. I said, but you've been coming for a long time. And are you interested in converting at all? Like, do you want to become Catholic? And he says, no, no, I'm happy, as I am. Like I said, I think he was a Lutheran or whatever. And I said, okay, I respect that. I said, but I got to ask, why, what keeps bringing you back? Why do you keep participating here if you're not interested in becoming Catholic? And I'll never forget his answer. He just looked at me and he said, y'all talk about Jesus.
Aw, I love that.
Yeah, I said, I'll take it. I'll take the compliment, and I
Yeah.
think about him from time to time because
Yeah.
one of the things about working with college students is I only have them for a very short period of time.
Yeah.
Um, our current pastor at our parish is a missionary priest. He's from Africa, and so he's traveled and ministered all over the world as a missionary. And
Hmm.
I told him when he came, I said, what I do on the college campus, I said, I'm a reverse missionary, meaning the people that I minister to come and go, but I stay put.
Yes, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So you don't always see the fruits of the seeds that you plant.
Right.
So I think about that young man, and I'm like, did he ever end up
Yeah.
becoming Catholic? Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah.
But during his time here, he learned about Jesus in the tradition of the Catholic Church, and so we're here for students like that too.
Okay. So I'm just curious. So would you be considered employed by the university or by the diocese?
I am employed by the diocese.
By the diocese.
Yes, I'm
But the
employed by the
universe,
diocese.
okay, but the university allows your presence on their within their community.
It does. We maintain a registered student organization.
Okay.
So students, and this is different just because we're on the campus of a public university. It's a state
Yes.
school. So campus ministry looks different depending on whether you're at a private school, state school, Catholic school,
Right.
Protestant school.
Yeah.
You have to kind of minister within the reality that God has planted you. So as a state institution, students are allowed to form religious clubs, religious
Mm-hmm.
student groups. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the responsibilities of our student leadership team is they maintain our status as a registered student organization, and that gives us access to campus
Wonderful.
facilities and all of that. So the campus recognizes us, but I do not work for the university. I work for the diocese,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
we're very blessed that the diocese owns property that is
Yeah.
adjacent to the university. So we have a permanent space that we can minister to the students out
Yeah.
of.
I love that. And one of the things that I really like about, I mean, I love that no matter where you go in the world, we're all hearing the same readings each week. The Catholic Mass is universal. And I remember bringing my oldest son to school, and he did go to a Catholic school, but they had they had a church or a chapel on campus. And I remember us going to mass and just me feeling good about like he's going to have access to what we're hearing at home and he'll have the opportunity. And so for your students, that's got to be so comforting for those students that their faith, not just the students that are non-Catholic, but the ones that have been practicing and are away from their family, and they can go in and feel like they're a part of the family, the Catholic faith there in your with your program that you have and worship and be fed and receive the Eucharist and all the good things. Yeah, I love that. And yeah, so was there anything else you wanted to share about that?
Just it's been a blessing. I think I have the best job in the world. I just always like to say that when I can.
Yeah, oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
It's really it truly has been a blessing, and
Wow.
I can't imagine doing anything else. I'm going into my 18th year as campus minister, and if this is the job that I have until I retire, I will be a very happy
That's
deacon.
wonderful.
So
That's
yeah.
and also with having seven children, having being exposed to all of those students and the issues they deal with, that probably has helped you as a father, I would think. And then being a father also helps you, in working with these students with the different
Hope
things that
so.
they're facing. I can't imagine it not, I
Yeah.
mean,
I hope so.
yeah,
I've been doing this for 18 years, like I said, and I
yeah.
remember when I started in this job, I was closer in age to my students than I was, to my own kids. And so it was my relationship with them really was more like, I guess, a big brother or
Oh,
something.
yeah, yeah.
But now, my students are my children's age. I
Yes.
have kids that have graduated from college, so they're older students, and so I definitely see them now as as more from a more paternal aspect.
Yes, yeah.
When I started in this job, I always told myself I never called them kids. I called them
Hmm.
students. I never called
Right.
them kids because they weren't kids,
Hmm.
but now they're kids because they're the same age as my kids.
Yeah,
But for
I love
sure,
that.
it's kind of bled into that, and
Yeah.
and for a lot of students, what they're looking for, they're away from home for the first time, and they need that father-like figure, that paternal figure. And I'm very clear. I'm not their dad. I'm not their
Right, right,
parent.
yeah.
But I do recognize that sometimes when students make appointments and they meet with me, it's because there's a real spiritual question or a theological question that they have, and I'm always happy to support them in that because that's what I'm here for. But as I think I mentioned before, sometimes they just need an adult that they can trust to talk them
Mm-hmm.
through a tight thing,
Right,
and
yeah.
I'm happy that I'm there for them in that respect
Yeah,
too.
and I'm sure there's many students that don't have dads in their life for whatever reason, death or
Yeah.
divorce or whatever. And it's always nice to be able to, especially younger men, I think it would be really nice to have that, to turn to. So now I wanted to hear about your book, The Devout Life. What inspired you to write it and whatever you want to share about it, I'd love to hear.
Yeah. Well, it was my wife that inspired me to write it. She's becoming a central figure in this podcast. We should have her on.
I know.
Uh,
When does she
yeah,
want to interview?
she would probably say no, not on your
Oh,
life, no. Um,
hey, that's like my husband. There's another common factor. You would do
yeah,
the same thing. Okay.
she's very much a behind the scenes champ. But no, so St. Francis de Sales was never really big on my radar, in terms of saints that I studied or knew much about, but his introduction to the devout life, I put it on my reading list. I think I was at a catechetical conference, something that was there was a presentation being given by a speaker from outside of our diocese, and he mentioned that the text that he used most often when he was training and offering formation to catechists was an introduction to the devout life. And the way that he talked about it, he said it's a perfect book to form people in the faith because it covers all aspects of discipleship, Christian living, and it's in neat little short sections that you can kind of easy to read and digest. And so he used that as the textbook when he was doing like lay ministry training, catechist training, and that kind of thing. And I remember hearing that and thinking, "Oh, that's interesting. I should read that book. That sounds useful." Because that's part of my role too in the Office of Catechetical Formation is training and forming catechists. And so um, that got put on my reading list. It wasn't until sometime later that I actually read it. If you're like me, or if your listeners are like me, there's a lot more on your reading list than actually gets read. you
Yeah.
know so my wife and I, we've for the long time had the habit of praying evening prayer together after we put the kids to bed. We'll do evening prayer from the hours, and at the time we also had taken up the practice of doing some kind of devotional reading after evening prayer. So we do evening prayer, and then we'd read like a chapter from a devotional and then discuss it, and we liked doing that. And we finished up whatever book we were reading, and we were looking for a new book to start. And I said, "Well, hey, I've got an introduction to the devout life sitting here, and I've wanted to read that for a while. Let's read that." Because it seemed very suited to it. It had little short chapters, just a page or two, and you could read it and discuss it. And it is everything that that speaker said. It's a wonderful book. It covers the whole width and breadth of the Christian life, from how do you pray, Christian meditation, to growing in virtue, to participating in the sacraments. It's just really wide ranging. It's written for lay people, so it's not assuming that you're a religious sister or a monk or clergy or anything. Um, but it was written 400 years ago by
Wow.
a French, bishop, Saint Francis de
Wow.
Sales. He was a bishop in France, and he was living and writing and ministering in the time in the immediate aftermath of the Protestant Reformation, and just so. Even though we're reading a modern English translation, obviously the context of what he was saying sometimes needed a little translating, not in terms of language, but just in terms of the context. And
Hmm.
and because Cathy, of the work that I do and have done for so long, ministering with college students, working with people in OCIA, offering spiritual direction, um, the struggles and the needs that people have spiritually haven't really changed, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was able to read what St. Francis de Sales wrote, and even though he's talking about a different context, I knew what he meant. And
Mm-hmm.
so very often, you know, my wife and I would do evening prayer, and I would read a little chapter from Introduction to the Devout Life, and I'd close the book, and I'd look at my wife, and she would say, "Okay, tell me what he meant. Tell me what he's
I
talking
love
about."
it.
And I
Oh,
would kind of have to explain that. And I always want to preface, my wife is very, very smart. Okay. She's
right.
very well read. She's very intelligent. So it's not that she doesn't know her stuff.
Mhm.
It's just there's this cultural barrier there between now and this 400-year-old book. So a lot of our conversations just ended up me kind of explaining, okay, well, this is what St. Francis de Sales is
Mhm.
saying here.
Which it
Uh,
seems like this is where your history is benefiting you both, right? Like 400 years ago, you're talking.
a little bit, because
Yeah, yeah.
I do know the church history, so I knew the context that he was writing in, but
Right.
really more so just my experience in kind of
Okay.
guiding people through these same questions, you know?
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we get about halfway through the book, and my wife looks at me one evening and she says, "This is really helpful. You should write this down." And
Wow.
I'm like, haha, thank you. That's funny, you know. And she gives me that look, you know, that lets me know, like, no, I'm serious. Like, you should write this. This would be a good, because her argument was, you know, there's so much good information that's in the introduction to the devout life, but there are people not reading it who could benefit from it because they're intimidated by this 400-year-old book.
Definitely.
So
Yeah.
I've given retreats on this and talks on this since I've published this book. And one of the things I like to do is I'll ask for show of hands. I'll say, how many people have heard of an introduction to the devout life? And almost everybody's hands go up, you know. And then I'll say, how many people have read an introduction to the devout life? And usually about three-quarters of the hands go down, right? So we
Mm-hmm.
got 25% of the people still have their hands up. And then I'll ask, how many people have finished reading an introduction to the devout life? And it's almost all the hands will go down, and there might be like one or two people with their hands still up.
Wow.
And I'll
Wow.
say, that's why I wrote this book, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what I've done is I talk about all the same things that St. Francis talks about. I
Mm-hmm.
follow his same path, his same trajectory, his same outline. So, but I put it in contemporary language and a contemporary context. So it's not a translation of his book at all. It's all me in terms of the words, but I mean, obviously I quote very heavily from it, but I also quote from St. John Paul II. I quote from St. John Newman. I quote from Mother Teresa. I quote from the Catechism. I quote from the Second Vatican Council. So, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I'm bringing the wisdom of St. Francis de Sales and his method of helping the laity to actually live out a life of Christian devotion, or what
Mm-hmm.
we would probably call today intentional discipleship. Hat
Mm-hmm.
tip to Sherry Waddell. You know, I bring that into the context of the 21st century church here in the United States to help it make sense to people.
Oh, wow.
But I've kept to his format of very short chapters, so you could read this like a daily devotional. The chapters are all between like 2 and 4 pages on average,
Mm-hmm.
but I've added to each chapter a number of reflection questions and a
Mm-hmm.
scripture passage for meditation. So you really could use this as a devotional, and you can, you know, journal with those reflection questions, or if you're reading this like with your spouse or with a small group of people, you could have a discussion, you know, around it.
Mm-hmm.
But it follows Saint Francis's trajectory. I like to say it's Saint Francis's wisdom,
Mm-hmm.
but it's it's as if you had me sitting there next to you, helping you to understand
Wow.
what St.
Wow. That's
Francis is
great.
talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think so many people are so busy that if something isn't easy for them to read, they're just going to move on to the next thing. And Or, I mean, it's got to draw interest and it also has to be doable for them, you know? And if it's that far off and it's going to take them that much effort, they're not going to read it, just like you said, your audiences, you know? So I love how you're bringing that to the forefront with your experience and your background and just making it more personal and doable for the people of this generation, you know? Yeah, yeah. I'm excited. Actually, I haven't read it, but not, I actually would like to get it. It sounds like something that I would really enjoy.
Good.
I'm
I hear
very
it's pretty
much,
good.
yeah, yeah. I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is from our conversation. And just knowing how, you know, talking to you even about your background and your work, um, you seem very aware not to just use words that people can't relate to. It's very relatable, but it's also very informative. So I'm assuming that your book is probably very much the same if you're the one writing it, right?
Yes, very intentionally so. I think one of the gifts that the Holy Spirit has given to me is the ability to express more complicated theological concepts or spiritual concepts in a way that the average person can understand.
Hmm.
I hope I'm not tooting my own horn too much, or it doesn't sound
No,
like that
no,
with
because
saying
I
that.
think that's really what our faith needs. We need that because like we said, there are people that this has been a part of their life since they were young. And so sometimes, and I'm not saying just because of that, those are people that don't know to do that, but I think that when you've been away from it and you come into it, you're aware of the language and how much there is to learn and how much depth there is that we do need it broken down because if you don't know anything about the Catholic faith and you're considering it, it's like from black and white. If it's somebody that you're talking to that isn't sensitive to the fact that you don't know what a chalice is or you don't know what the Eucharist is, you know what I mean? Like all
I
those
think that
things.
that comes from the fact that I was raised with none of this, right?
Yes.
And so when
Hmm.
I was studying the Catholic faith, it was like I wasn't even coming from Protestantism. I had no context in which to understand this, and so I had to learn it from scratch.
Hmm.
And so that's as my education has continued, that's always been true. Like I first have to explain things to myself
Hmm.
in a way that a knucklehead like me can understand it. And because I've had to explain it in a way that makes sense to me first,
Right.
that enables me to explain it in a way that I hope is easier to understand, for other people. Now, that
Definitely.
being said, The Devout Life, my book, the full title is The Devout Life, A Modern Guide to Practical Holiness with St. Francis de Sales.
Hmm.
Um, the assumed audience for this book is someone who is Catholic,
Okay.
but I don't assume that so the assumption is that they're familiar with the basics of
Hmm. Hmm.
Catholicism, but
Yeah.
I'm not assuming any particular level of theological expertise or
Right.
spiritual, development. I kind of wrote it for the average sitting in the pews Sunday morning Catholic
Yeah.
who is ready to take that next step.
Hmm.
I'm
Yeah.
ready to go beyond just coming to church on Sunday morning and, maybe saying a blessing before meals, but otherwise the faith doesn't really have much impact in my life. Like,
Hmm.
how do I go farther?
Okay.
There's got to be more to Christian discipleship than this. What do I do? How do I live
Yeah.
this out? That's the person that this book is really meant for. It's not an OCIA textbook,
Right,
it's
right.
not for that.
Yeah.
But it would
Yeah.
make a great gift for someone, say, who was just confirmed,
Yeah, yeah.
as a way to continue that journey forward in faith. It's like, okay, you've received the sacraments. Now
Yeah.
what?
Well, the
What's the
interesting
next step?
thing too is that even Catholics, because our faith is so full and there's so many different opportunities, everybody kind of forges their own journey. And so even Catholics that maybe practice a certain way might read it and then see another way that they can kind of live out the faith that they weren't doing before, you know? So, um, could you share with our listeners where people can find your book?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the publisher is Sophia Institute Press. God bless them. Thank them for agreeing to publish it. So the best place to buy it is to go to sophiainstitute.com. And if you just type in Devout Life, or you can type in my name, it'll come up. So that's the best way to buy it. But it's also on Amazon, and it's on Barnes and Noble, and anywhere that carries Catholic books, you should be able to find it.
Okay, and then I'll also put that in the show notes so people can click on the link and make it a little bit easier if they want
You.
to. So the last thing I want to ask you is if you have any words of wisdom, support, or encouragement for Catholics that are either looking to rekindle their faith or non-Catholics that are looking to understand more about the faith.
Yeah, do it. Respond. That is the prompting of the Holy Spirit. I know very often we will get prompts like that. It's like, oh, I should do more about this. I should do more about that, and then we just kind of sit on it, and that's a missed opportunity. If you're a Catholic that is ready to take that next step and learn more about the faith, or if you're on the outside of the church and you're kind of looking in, and you're like, this looks intriguing, like there's more there. Don't ignore that urge. Do it, right? Take that
Mm-hmm.
next step, whatever that next step might be. I don't know. That's going to depend upon your situation. Maybe it is contacting the local parish and setting up a meeting with a priest, right? And say, I'm ready to advance in the spiritual life. I want to take this deeper, or I'm ready to. I want to learn more about the Catholic faith. Do you have an inquiry program, or something? Maybe it's that. Maybe it's signing up for an adult Bible study that's offered at your parish. But the faith is not meant to be something that is theoretical. I know that there's a lot of I'm reading news stories about just this surge of converts that we've got this year coming into the church this past Easter, and I know a lot of it was driven by social media and Catholic
Mm-hmm.
influencers and YouTube personalities and podcasts,
Mm-hmm.
and things like this.
Mm-hmm.
But the church doesn't exist just in these online spaces. As
Mm-hmm.
wonderful and as influential, as all of that is. And I have my Catholic podcasters I listen to, guys, and
Mm-hmm.
it's great. But the church is incarnational, it's
Mm-hmm.
local. Go to your local parish, make Catholic friends, join in these Catholic communities. And yeah, they're not always going to like have the best liturgies like you see televised from the Vatican. They're not
Mm-hmm.
always going to have Scott Hahn leading the Bible study or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
the real life of the church can be messy and imperfect, and guess what? We're messy and imperfect, but that's
Mm-hmm.
that's where grace happens. That's where the community is. This is where Christ is calling us to um, help form and shape one another, and to learn those lessons of holiness that we all need to learn, to grow in virtues like patience and forgiveness and
Mm-hmm.
gentleness and trust. And so live it out. So that's what I mean when I say, yeah,
Yeah.
just do it. Just
Awesome.
do it.
Yeah.
There's no magical formula. There's no, just dive in.
Mm-hmm.
But final word of caution, also don't bite off too much, more than you can chew. Because you mentioned, Cathy, earlier, just the depth and the richness of our faith traditions. I know I've seen people get so into it, and they're so excited. Like every time I talk to them, they've got a new novena, a new devotion, a new chaplet, that they're doing. And then sometimes I see them burned out. Find a devotion that works for you, and stick with it, and let that form you and bear fruit in your life, whether it's a
Mm-hmm.
rosary, whether it's Lectio Divina. But I even say this in the final chapter in my book, because there's a lot of great stuff that St. Francis de Sales advises us to do. And so my final caveat in the book is, you do not have to do everything. If
Yes.
you
Yeah.
tried to do everything, you would get worn out. And and
Yeah.
and St. Francis is not saying, I am not saying, the church is not saying you have to practice every single devotion.
Mm-hmm.
These are like menu items, right?
Yep.
Use what works for you to help you conform your life to the life of Christ and for Christ
Mm-hmm.
to live in you. Sometimes I think the guy who's working a full-time job and he's getting his kids to mass on Sunday morning and he's praying a family rosary with his wife every night and he's helping the Knights of Columbus, with their fish fries. And he's probably closer to heaven than most of us who work full time for the church,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because he's consistent in the faith
Mm-hmm.
and he's
Mm-hmm.
doing living his vocation that God called him to live out. So that's where we're called to grow, in those average, ordinary moments in life when we're called to exercise charity, to exercise the virtues. And so those two things together, I realize I kind of
Mm-hmm.
contradicted myself. Jump in, do it, participate in the life of the church, but also just don't more than you can chew. Do
Yeah.
do what is proper for your state and station in life, and let those devotions form you.
Yeah, I agree. Honestly, with my coaching services week, when I work with clients, we come up with action steps and we want to move them forward, but we don't want them overwhelmed. And that's what it sounds like. And I think from what you said
Way of putting
earlier,
it.
yeah, earlier in the podcast, you mentioned when you were inside the church, it was different than so these podcasts and these conversations are meant to support you and direct you to be with Christ who's in the church and just step inside the church and just take it in. You don't even have to do anything special, just be there because it is so different than what people think from the outside. And there is a peace and a comfort and a calm that you'll receive, I believe, from that. And Deacon Matthew, I just want to say thank you so much. Everything that you have shared, I think it is so important and so valuable. And I pray that listeners take it in and just take on some of the advice that you shared. And I wish you and your family and your campus the best in the future, and that you have wonderful weddings this year with your two oldest children.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on, Cathy, and yeah, God bless you. Have a blessed Easter.
Thank you so much. You too.